The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training ground as Captain Sarah Chun stood at attention with the other soldiers. Her small frame looked almost fragile among the towering men surrounding her, but her eyes held a fire that burned brighter than the desert heat. Today was the day she had been working toward for 3 years, the day she would finally earn her combat badge. General Marcus Stone stepped out of his black SUV, his polished boots clicking against the concrete. At 62, he was a man carved from granite and tradition. His chest displayed more medals than most soldiers would see in a lifetime, each one earned through blood, sweat, and unwavering dedication to his country. He had served in 4 different wars and commanded respect from every corner of the military. Sarah watched as the general approached their formation. She had heard stories about him, how he once held off an entire enemy battalion with just 12 men, how he never backed down from a fight, and how he believed that some things in the military should never change. Women in combat roles was one of those things. Listen up, soldiers. General Stone's voice boomed across the training ground. Today you think you're going to earn your combat badges. Let me tell you something. These badges aren't participation trophies. They represent the highest honor a soldier can achieve. They're earned through sacrifice, courage, and the kind of strength that can't be taught in any classroom. He began walking down the line of soldiers, his sharp eyes examining each one. When he reached Sarah, he stopped. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire about to snap. "And what do we have here?" he said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Another social experiment?" Sarah kept her eyes forward, refusing to flinch under his gaze. "No, sir. Just a soldier ready to serve, sir." General Stone circled her slowly, like a predator studying its prey. "A soldier, you say? Do you know what it takes to earn this badge, girl? Do you understand the weight of responsibility that comes with it?" "Yes, sir, I do." "I doubt that." He stopped in front of her again. "I've seen good men, strong men, break under the pressure of real combat. Men who could bench press twice their body weight and run marathons without breaking a sweat. And you think you can handle what they couldn't?" The other soldiers shifted uncomfortably. They all knew Sarah's reputation. She had outperformed most of them in marksmanship, tactical planning, and physical endurance tests. But the general seemed determined to ignore those facts. "Sir, with all due respect," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her chest. "I've trained alongside these men for 3 years. I've proven myself in every test, every simulation, every training." General Stone barked, cutting her off. "You think training is the same as real combat? You think shooting at paper targets prepares you for the moment when another human being is trying to kill you?" He turned to address the entire formation. "This badge represents warriors who've looked death in the eye and didn't blink. It represents soldiers who've made the ultimate sacrifice to protect their brothers and sisters in arms. It's not something you earn because the politicians say everyone gets a fair chance." Sarah felt her face burning with humiliation, but she forced herself to remain still. Around her, she could sense the discomfort of her fellow soldiers. Many of them had trained with her, had seen her skills firsthand. They knew she belonged here. "You want to know what real combat is like?" General Stone continued, his voice growing louder. "It's watching your best friend die in your arms while bullets fly overhead. It's making split-second decisions that determine whether your entire unit lives or dies. It's carrying a wounded comrade on your back for 10 miles through enemy territory. Can you do that?" "I believe I can, sir." The general laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Belief isn't enough. This isn't about equal opportunity or political correctness. This is about life and death. When the enemy is shooting at you, they don't care about your feelings or your rights. They just want to kill you and everyone around you." He leaned in closer to Sarah, his voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. "You don't earn that badge by checking boxes on some diversity checklist. You earn it through blood and sacrifice. And, frankly, I don't think you have what it takes." Sarah's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she kept her voice level. "Then, test me, sir. Give me the chance to prove you wrong." General Stone straightened up and addressed the formation again. "Today's exercise is simple. You'll be dropped into a combat simulation zone. Your mission is to eliminate enemy targets while protecting civilian assets. You'll face real ammunition, real explosions, and real danger. Anyone who isn't ready for that level of intensity should speak up now." None of the soldiers moved. "Good. But let me be clear about one thing. His eyes found Sarah again. This badge isn't given out based on potential or good intentions. You either earn it through demonstrated excellence in combat, or you don't earn it at all. There are no participation awards in war. The trucks arrive to transport them to the simulation zone. As Sarah climbed into the back of one of the vehicles, she could feel the eyes of the other soldiers on her. Some looked sympathetic, others seemed embarrassed by the general's treatment of her. A few appeared to agree with his assessment. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, a stocky man with kind eyes, settled in beside her. "Don't let him get to you, Chun. We've all seen what you can do." "Thanks, Rodriguez," Sarah replied quietly. "But I'm not doing this for him or anyone else. I'm doing it for me." The truck rumbled to life and began moving toward the training area. Sarah stared out the back, watching the base disappear behind them. She thought about the path that had brought her here, the years of struggle, the constant need to prove herself, the doors that had been slammed in her face simply because of her gender. Growing up, Sarah had always been different from other girls. While her friends were playing with dolls, she was reading military history books. When they were worried about makeup and boys, she was planning her future in the armed forces. Her father, a retired Marine, had encouraged her dreams even when everyone else told her she was being unrealistic. "The military is changing, sweetheart," he had told her on the day she shipped out to basic training. "But change doesn't come easy. You'll have to work twice as hard as everyone else just to get half the recognition. Are you ready for that?" She had been ready then, and she was ready now. The simulation zone was a sprawling complex of buildings, obstacles, and terrain designed to replicate real combat conditions. As the soldiers gathered around General Stone for their final briefing, Sarah studied the layout carefully. She had run similar exercises before, but never under such scrutiny. "Your objective is simple," the general explained, pointing to a map. "Enemy forces have taken control of this village. There are hostages inside who need to be rescued. You'll work in teams of 4 to clear the buildings and neutralize all threats. Remember, in real combat, hesitation kills. You need to be decisive, accurate, and ruthless." He assigned the teams, deliberately placing Sarah with 3 soldiers she had never worked with before. It was clearly designed to test her ability to adapt and lead under difficult circumstances. As they prepared their equipment, one of her new teammates, Corporal James Wilson, pulled her aside. "Look, I don't know what the general's problem is with you, but I want you to know that I'm here to do the mission. Nothing else matters to me." "Appreciate that, Wilson," Sarah replied, checking her rifle. "Let's just focus on getting everyone home safely." The exercise began with a simulated artillery bombardment. Explosions echoed across the training ground as the teams moved toward their objectives. Sarah's team approached their assigned building from the east, using cover and concealment to avoid detection. Through her scope, Sarah could see movement in the upper floors. Enemy combatants were positioned at windows, waiting for the assault teams to expose themselves. She counted at least 6 targets, all armed and ready for a fight. "Wilson, take Peterson and flank around to the south in trance," she whispered into her radio. "Martinez, and I will create a distraction from the front. Wait for my signal before you move." "Roger that," Wilson replied. Sarah positioned herself behind a concrete barrier and began scanning for targets. The simulation used special ammunition that would register hits without causing actual injury, but the stress and adrenaline were real. Her heart pounded as she waited for the perfect moment to strike. "Contact front," Martinez called out as enemy fire erupted from the building. Bullets cracked overhead, forcing both soldiers to take cover. This was it. This was what General Stone had been talking about. The moment when training met reality, when split-second decisions determined life and death. Sarah felt time slow down as her training took over. She spotted a muzzle flash in a second-story window. Without hesitation, she raised her rifle and fired. The target went down immediately. Another enemy soldier appeared at a different window, and Sarah shifted her aim smoothly, firing again. Another hit. "Moving," she called to Martinez, then sprinted across the open ground to a new position. Enemy fire followed her, but she reached cover safely. From her new angle, she could see into the building's interior. 2 more targets were visible, both armed and dangerous. Sarah steadied her breathing, lined up her shots, and fired twice in rapid succession. Both enemies fell. "Clear on the east side." Wilson's voice crackled through the radio. "Building secure. The entire engagement had lasted less than 3 minutes, but Sarah felt like she had been fighting for hours. Her heart was racing, her hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline, but her mind was crystal clear. This was what she had trained for. This was what she was meant to do. As the teams regrouped, General Stone appeared with a group of observers. He had been watching the entire exercise, taking notes, and making assessments. Sarah could see the surprise in his eyes as he reviewed the results. "Impressive shooting, Chun," Corporal Martinez said as they cleaned their weapons. "I've never seen anyone move that fast and stay that accurate." "Just doing my job," Sarah replied, but inside she was thrilled. She had performed flawlessly under pressure, and she knew it. General Stone approached their group, his face unreadable. "Debrief in 10 minutes, he announced. "I want to review everything that happened out there." As the soldiers gathered in the briefing room, Sarah noticed that the general kept glancing at her with a puzzled expression. It was clear that her performance had exceeded his expectations, but she could tell he wasn't ready to admit it. "Overall, the exercise was successful," he began. "Most teams completed their objectives within the time limit. There were some good individual performances and some areas that need improvement." He went through each team's results methodically, praising some soldiers and criticizing others. When he reached Sarah's team, he paused. "Team 4 had some interesting results," he said slowly. "They completed their objective faster than any other team and did so with 0 simulated casualties. That's noteworthy." Sarah waited for him to elaborate, but he simply moved on to the next team. She could feel the frustration building inside her chest. No matter what she did, it seemed like it would never be enough for him. After the debrief, as the soldiers prepared to return to base, General Stone pulled Sarah aside. "That was good work out there," he said quietly, "but don't let it go to your head. One exercise doesn't make you a warrior." "I understand that, sir," Sarah replied, "but it's a start." The general studied her face for a long moment. "You really think you're ready for combat, don't you?" "I know I am, sir." He shook his head slowly. "Combat isn't just about shooting straight, soldier. It's about making impossible decisions under unimaginable pressure. It's about living with the consequences of those decisions for the rest of your life. Until you've done that, you haven't earned anything." As he walked away, Sarah felt a mixture of pride and frustration. She had proven herself today, but she knew it wasn't enough. The general's mind was made up about her, and nothing short of a miracle was going to change it. But Sarah Chun had never been one to back down from a challenge. If General Stone wanted proof that she could handle real combat, then she would find a way to give it to him. She just hoped she would get the chance before it was too late. The ride back to base was quiet. Sarah stared out the window at the passing desert landscape, her mind racing with thoughts of what came next. She had passed the first test, but she knew there would be others. The general wasn't going to make this easy for her. As the base came into view, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. No matter what obstacles were placed in her path, no matter how many people doubted her abilities, she would earn that combat badge. Not because she wanted to prove the doubters wrong, but because she knew in her heart that she was meant to be a soldier. The truck pulled through the base gates, and Sarah prepared herself for whatever challenges tomorrow would bring. She had come too far to give up now, and she wasn't about to start. 3 weeks had passed since the simulation exercise, and Sarah felt like she was living in a pressure cooker. Every training session, every evaluation, every moment of her military life was being scrutinized by General Stone and his staff. She knew they were looking for any excuse to disqualify her from combat duty. The other soldiers had noticed the tension too. Some tried to show support in small ways, a nod of encouragement, an extra helping at chow, or backing her up during training exercises. Others seemed to distance themselves, perhaps afraid that associating with her might hurt their own chances of advancement. Sarah sat in her quarters, cleaning her rifle for the 3rd time that day. It was a ritual that helped calm her nerves and focus her mind. The weapon gleamed under the fluorescent lights, every component perfectly maintained and ready for action. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Sergeant Rodriguez entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering her one of the cups. "Thanks, Mike," Sarah replied, setting down her rifle. "What's on your mind?" Rodriguez sat down on the chair across from her small desk. "I've been thinking about what happened during the exercise. The way the general treated you, it wasn't right." "It's nothing I can't handle," Sarah said, sipping the coffee. It was strong and black, exactly how she liked it. "Maybe not, but it's not just about you anymore." The whole unit is watching this situation. Some of the younger soldiers are starting to question whether the military really is changing or if it's all just talk. Sarah looked at him thoughtfully. Rodriguez had been in the army for 15 years and had earned respect through consistent performance and leadership. His opinion carried weight with the other soldiers. "What do you think I should do?" she asked. "Keep doing what you're doing," he replied firmly. "Show them every day that you belong here." Eventually, even the general will have to admit the truth. Before Sarah could respond, her radio crackled to life. "All personnel report to the briefing room immediately." This is not a drill. Sarah and Rodriguez exchanged glances. Emergency briefings usually meant one thing. A real mission was about to be announced. They hurried across the base to the main briefing room, where soldiers were filing in from all directions. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and nervous energy. Sarah noticed that General Stone was already there, along with several other high-ranking officers she didn't recognize. "Listen up, soldiers," General Stone announced once everyone was seated. "We've received intelligence about a terrorist cell operating in a remote village about 200 miles from here. They've taken hostages, aid workers who were providing medical supplies to the local population." A map appeared on the screen behind him, showing a mountainous region with difficult terrain and limited access routes. "The situation is time-sensitive," the general continued. "Our intelligence suggests the terrorists plan to execute the hostages at dawn tomorrow if their demands aren't met. That gives us approximately 18 hours to plan and execute a rescue mission." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was a real combat mission. Everything she had trained for was about to be put to the test. "The mission will require a small, elite team," General Stone said, his eyes scanning the room. "The terrain is too rough for vehicles, so we'll be going in on foot. The enemy is well-armed and highly motivated. This is not going to be easy." He began calling names for the mission roster. Sarah listened intently, hoping to hear her name. One by one, the general selected experienced combat veterans, soldiers who had proven themselves in previous deployments. Rodriguez, Wilson, Martinez, Thompson. The list continued, but Sarah's name wasn't called. When he finished, General Stone looked directly at her. "Chun, you'll remain here on base. Consider this an opportunity to observe how real missions are planned and executed." Sarah felt like she had been punched in the stomach. After everything she had done, after proving herself in training, she was still being excluded when it mattered most. "Sir, request permission to speak," she said, standing up. "Denied," General Stone replied curtly. "The team has been selected based on combat experience and mission requirements. The decision is final." As the selected soldiers filed out for detailed mission planning, Sarah remained seated, struggling to control her emotions. She felt the sympathetic glances from some of her fellow soldiers, but they only made her feel worse. Rodriguez paused beside her chair. "This isn't over," he whispered quietly. "Keep your gear ready." Sarah spent the next several hours in a state of frustrated limbo. She watched as the mission team prepared their equipment, studied satellite photos, and rehearsed their assault plan. Every fiber of her being wanted to be part of that preparation, but she had been relegated to the role of observer. As evening approached, she found herself alone in the equipment room, checking and rechecking her gear out of habit. The ritual helped her think, and she needed to process what was happening. The door opened, and Captain James Miller entered. Miller was the unit's intelligence officer, a quiet man with sharp analytical skills who rarely spoke unless he had something important to say. "Chun," he said, "I need to talk to you." "What is it, sir?" Miller looked around to make sure they were alone. "I've been reviewing the intelligence for tomorrow's mission. There's something that doesn't add up." He pulled out a folder containing satellite photographs and intelligence reports. "According to our sources, the terrorist cell is led by a woman known as the Viper. She's extremely dangerous and has been responsible for multiple attacks throughout the region." Sarah studied the photographs. They showed a mountainous village with narrow streets and multi-story buildings that could hide dozens of enemies. "The problem," Miller continued, "is that our intelligence on her operational methods is limited. She's known for using unexpected tactics and exploiting weaknesses in conventional military approaches." "What does that have to do with me, sir?" Miller hesitated before answering. "Your training scores show a unique aptitude for unconventional tactics and adaptive thinking. You might see things that others miss." Sarah felt a flicker of hope. "Are you suggesting that I should be part of the mission team?" I'm not suggesting anything officially, Miller replied carefully. But I am saying that this mission might benefit from someone with your particular skill set. Before Sarah could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the base. Emergency lights flashed as soldiers rushed to their positions. Something had gone wrong. General Stone's voice echoed over the intercom. All personnel to battle stations. We have confirmed enemy activity in our perimeter. This is not a drill. Sarah grabbed her weapon and equipment, following Miller toward the command center. Through the windows, she could see muzzle flashes in the darkness beyond the base's outer fence. Enemy forces had somehow penetrated their security and were launching an attack. How'd they get so close? Miller shouted over the noise of gunfire and explosions. Doesn't matter now, Sarah replied, checking her rifle. We need to stop them before they reach the main compound. The attack was coordinated and brutal. Rocket-propelled grenades exploded against the base's defensive walls, while enemy snipers targeted anyone who exposed themselves. It was clear that this wasn't a random assault. Someone had planned this carefully. General Stone was coordinating the defense from the command center, but Sarah could see that the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The enemy had superior positions and seemed to know exactly where the base's weak points were located. "Chun," Rodriguez called out as he sprinted past. "The eastern perimeter is being overrun. We need everyone we can get over there." Sarah didn't hesitate. She followed Rodriguez toward the sound of heaviest fighting, where soldiers were struggling to hold their positions against overwhelming enemy fire. The scene was chaos. Wounded soldiers were being dragged to safety, while others fired desperately at muzzle flashes in the darkness. Sarah could see that the defensive line was close to breaking. Without waiting for orders, she analyzed the tactical situation. The enemy had positioned themselves in a cluster of buildings about 300 meters from the perimeter fence. They had excellent fields of fire and were using the civilian structures for cover. "Rodriguez," she called out, "we need to flank them from the south. If we can get behind those buildings, we can cut off their escape route." "Too dangerous," he shouted back. "The open ground is covered by enemy fire." Sarah studied the terrain more carefully. There was a drainage ditch that ran parallel to the fence line, providing concealment for most of the distance. It would be risky, but it might work. "Cover me," she said, then sprinted toward the ditch before anyone could stop her. Enemy bullets cracked overhead as Sarah dove into the concrete channel. It was deeper than she had expected, providing better protection than anticipated. She began moving along the ditch, using the darkness to mask her movement. The plan was simple but dangerous. If she could reach the buildings undetected, she might be able to attack the enemy from their blind spot. It was exactly the kind of unconventional thinking that Captain Miller had mentioned. As she moved through the ditch, Sarah could hear the battle raging above her. Explosions shook the ground, and the sound of automatic weapons fire was constant. Her fellow soldiers were counting on her to succeed. After what felt like an eternity, she reached the end of the ditch. Ahead of her were the buildings where the enemy had established their stronghold. She could see muzzle flashes from the upper floors as the terrorists continued their assault on the base. Sarah climbed carefully out of the ditch and began moving toward the nearest building. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. This was real combat, life and death decisions with no room for error. She reached the building's rear entrance and tested the door. It was unlocked, which surprised her until she realized that the enemy probably hadn't expected anyone to approach from this direction. Moving slowly and quietly, Sarah entered the building and began climbing the stairs. She could hear voices above her, at least 3 different people speaking in a language she didn't recognize. On the second floor, she encountered her first enemy combatant. He was focused on the battle outside and didn't notice her approach until it was too late. Sarah neutralized him quickly and silently, then moved toward the next room. The next 2 enemies were positioned at windows overlooking the base. Sarah took them down in rapid succession, her marksmanship training paying off in the most crucial moment of her life. With the upper floors cleared, she began working her way back down. The building was now secure, but the other structures still contained enemy forces. She needed to keep moving. As Sarah exited the building, she noticed that the enemy fire from her sector had stopped. The other terrorists had probably realized that something was wrong, but it was too late to adjust their positions effectively. She moved to the next building and repeated the process. Each engagement was quick and precise, her training taking over completely. Within 30 minutes, she had cleared 3 buildings and eliminated 8 enemy combatants. The attack on the base began to falter as the enemy realized they were being attacked from behind. Their coordinated assault turned into a chaotic retreat as they found themselves caught between 2 lines of fire. By dawn, the battle was over. The surviving attackers had fled into the mountains, leaving behind weapons and equipment in their haste to escape. The base was secure, but the cost had been high. 3 soldiers were dead, and 12 more were wounded. General Stone surveyed the aftermath with a mixture of relief and anger. The attack had caught them completely off guard, and only quick thinking by his soldiers had prevented a disaster. "Sir," Captain Miller approached with his preliminary report. "We've identified how the enemy got so close. They used the same drainage system that—" He paused, looking around. "Where's Chun?" Sarah emerged from the building she had been clearing, her uniform dirty and her equipment showing signs of hard use. She looked exhausted but unharmed. General Stone stared at her in surprise. "Chun, what are you doing out there?" "Securing the perimeter, sir," she replied simply. "The enemy had established positions in these buildings. I eliminated the threat." "You what?" The general looked at the buildings, then back at Sarah. "How many hostiles?" "8 confirmed, sir. All neutralized." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of helicopters approaching to evacuate the wounded. General Stone studied Sarah's face, looking for any sign of boasting or self-congratulation. He found none. "You moved through enemy territory alone?" he asked finally. "Yes, sir. The tactical situation required immediate action." Rodriguez approached, shaking his head in amazement. "General, you should have seen it. She flanked them through the drainage ditch while they were focused on our defensive line. Textbook unconventional warfare." General Stone walked toward the buildings Sarah had cleared. Inside, he found the evidence of her night's work. Enemy combatants taken down with precision shooting, equipment secured, and intelligence materials gathered. When he returned, he looked at Sarah with an expression she had never seen before. It wasn't quite respect, but it wasn't dismissal either. "That was adequate work, soldier," he said slowly. "But don't think one night of combat makes you qualified for special operations." Sarah wanted to scream in frustration. Even after saving lives and protecting the base, the general couldn't bring himself to acknowledge her accomplishments. But she kept her expression neutral. "Understood, sir," she replied. As the soldiers began cleaning up the aftermath of the attack, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. Among the equipment left behind by the enemy, she found intelligence documents that referenced the hostage situation they had been planning to address. The attack on their base hadn't been random. It had been a diversion designed to prevent the rescue mission from launching on schedule. While they had been fighting for their lives, the terrorists were probably executing their hostages. Sarah brought the documents to Captain Miller, who confirmed her worst fears. The mission to rescue the aid workers would now have to be scrapped. They had missed their window of opportunity. As she stood in the morning sun, still covered in dust and cordite residue from the night's fighting, Sarah felt a deep sadness settle over her. She had proven herself in combat, but it had come at a terrible cost. Innocent people had died because the enemy had outsmarted them. General Stone approached her one last time before dismissing the soldiers to rest and refit. "Chun," he said quietly, "what you did tonight was brave. Reckless, but brave." "Thank you, sir. But bravery alone doesn't make someone ready for special operations. Real leadership means thinking beyond the immediate tactical situation. It means considering the bigger picture." Sarah nodded, but inside she was thinking about those hostages. The bigger picture was exactly what she had been considering, and it was that perspective that would drive everything she did from this point forward. The general walked away, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. She had passed another test, but she knew there would be more challenges ahead. The question was whether she would get the chance to prove herself when it really mattered, when lives hung in the balance and there was no room for doubt or hesitation. As she cleaned her weapon and prepared for whatever came next, Sarah made another silent promise. The next time innocent people needed help, she would be ready. No matter what obstacles stood in her way, she would find a way to make a difference. The war was far from over, and Sarah Chun was just getting started. 2 months after the base attack, Sarah found herself deployed to a forward operating base in one of the most dangerous regions of the conflict zone. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving: rocky mountains, deep valleys, and scattered villages where enemy forces could hide among civilian populations. Despite her performance during the base defense, General Stone had made sure she was assigned to routine patrol duties rather than special operations. Sarah understood the message. She might be competent enough for basic combat, but she still hadn't earned the right to be considered for elite missions. The forward base was a collection of fortified buildings surrounded by concrete barriers and razor wire. It housed about 200 soldiers whose job was to maintain security in the region and support larger operations when needed. The conditions were harsh. Temperatures swung from scorching during the day to near freezing at night, and the constant threat of enemy attack kept everyone on edge. Sarah had been assigned to Delta Squad, led by Staff Sergeant Tom Harrison. Harrison was a no-nonsense professional who evaluated people based on their performance rather than their gender or politics. Under his command, Sarah finally felt like she was being judged fairly. "Chun, you're on point today," Harrison announced as the squad prepared for their morning patrol. "Intelligence reports possible enemy movement in the Kaler Valley. We need to investigate and gather information." Sarah checked her equipment one final time. Her rifle was clean and properly zeroed. Her radio was functioning correctly, and she carried enough ammunition and supplies for an extended mission. After months of training and preparation, this kind of patrol had become routine. The squad moved out at dawn, hiking through rocky terrain toward their objective. Sarah led the way, using her knowledge of the local geography to choose the safest and most efficient routes. Behind her, the other 5 members of the squad maintained proper spacing and security. As they approached the valley, Sarah noticed something that didn't feel right. The area was too quiet. No bird songs, no sounds of daily life in the nearby village. Her instincts, honed by months of combat experience, told her something was wrong. "Sergeant," she called softly into her radio, "I'm seeing indicators of possible ambush ahead. Recommend we alter our route." Harrison trusted her judgment. "Roger that. Take us around to the East Ridge. We'll approach from higher ground." The decision probably saved their lives. As they climbed toward the ridge, Sarah spotted the glint of metal in the rocks below. Enemy fighters positioned exactly where they would have walked if they had continued on their original path. "Contact front," Sarah whispered. "At least 6 hostiles in defensive positions. They're waiting for someone." Harrison moved up to observe the situation. Through his binoculars, he could see that Sarah was right. Enemy fighters had prepared an ambush site with interlocking fields of fire and multiple escape routes. It was a professional setup that would have been deadly for any patrol walking into it. "Good eyes, Chun," Harrison said quietly. "Call in a base. We need backup before we engage." Sarah contacted their command post and provided a detailed report of the enemy positions. Within minutes, she received word that air support was being dispatched and additional ground forces were en route. But before help could arrive, the situation changed dramatically. "Sergeant, I'm hearing voices from the village," reported Corporal Davis, the squad's radio operator. "Sounds like civilians in distress." Harrison used his binoculars to scan the village below. What he saw made his blood run cold. Enemy fighters were herding villagers into the central square, including women and children. Some of the civilians appear to be wounded. "They're using them as human shields," Harrison said grimly. "If we wait for air support, innocent people are going to die." Sarah studied the tactical situation carefully. The enemy had chosen their position well. They could defend against attack while maintaining control over the civilian population. Any conventional assault would result in heavy casualties among both soldiers and villagers. "Sergeant, I have an idea," Sarah said. "If I can get around behind the village, I might be able to create a distraction that draws some of the fighters away from the civilians." "Too risky," Harrison replied immediately. "You'd be on your own with no backup." "Not necessarily," Sarah pointed out. "If you and the rest of the squad provide covering fire from this position, you can keep most of the enemy pinned down. I only need to deal with the ones guarding the civilians." Harrison considered the plan. It was dangerous and relied heavily on precise timing and coordination. But conventional tactics weren't working, and the civilians were running out of time. "All right, Chun, but you stick to the plan. Get in, create confusion, and get out. Don't try to be a hero." Sarah nodded and began preparing for her solo mission. She shed unnecessary equipment to move faster and lighter, keeping only her rifle, sidearm, and essential gear. The route she had chosen would take her through a dry creek bed that offered concealment for most of the approach. As she prepared to move out, Harrison grabbed her arm. "Chun, I want you to know, you've proven yourself as far as I'm concerned. Don't do anything stupid that'll prove me wrong." "I won't, Sergeant. Just give me 10 minutes to get in position." Sarah began her approach, moving carefully through the rocky terrain. The creek bed provided good cover, but it also limited her ability to see the enemy positions. She had to trust her memory of the layout and hope that the fighters hadn't moved since her initial observation. As she got closer to the village, she could hear the sounds of frightened civilians and shouted orders in the local dialect. Her heart raced, but her training kept her focused on the mission objectives. The creek bed ended about 50 meters from the village's outer buildings. From there, Sarah would have to cross open ground to reach the structures where the enemy had positioned their guards. It would be the most dangerous part of her approach. She waited for the covering fire from her squad to begin. When Harrison's signal came through her radio, Sarah sprinted across the open space, zigzagging to make herself a harder target. Enemy bullets cracked past her, but she reached the first building safely. Now came the hardest part. Sarah needed to eliminate the guards who were controlling the civilians without alerting the main enemy force. It would require perfect timing and absolute precision. She worked her way through the village's narrow alleys, using her knowledge of urban combat to stay hidden. Through a window, she could see the central square where the villagers were being held. 3 enemy fighters stood guard over them, while others maintained defensive positions around the perimeter. Sarah positioned herself at a second-story window with a clear view of the square. From here, she could engage all 3 guards quickly before they could harm the civilians. But she would only get one chance. If she missed or hesitated, innocent people would die. She steadied her breathing and lined up her first shot. The guard was standing about 75 meters away, an easy target for someone with her marksmanship skills. But the knowledge that civilian lives depended on her accuracy made every shot feel like the most important of her career. Sarah fired 3 times in rapid succession. All 3 guards went down before any of them could react. The civilians scattered for cover as she had hoped, removing themselves from the line of fire. "Guards neutralized," she reported over her radio. "Civilians are seeking cover." "Copy that, Chun. Nice shooting. Now get out of there." But as Sarah prepared to withdraw, she heard something that made her blood freeze, the cry of a child in distress. One of the villagers, a little girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old, had become separated from her family and was wandering in the square, directly in the line of fire between the enemy positions and Harrison's squad. Sarah could see enemy fighters moving to recapture the square. In seconds, the area would become a battlefield with the child caught in the middle. She had to make a choice: follow orders and withdraw, or risk everything to save one little girl. The decision was easy. Sarah burst from her hiding place and sprinted toward the child, firing at enemy positions as she ran. Bullets whistled past her as she scooped up the terrified little girl and dove behind a stone wall just as enemy fire intensified. "Chin, what's your status?" Harrison's voice crackled through her radio. "I've got a civilian child with me," Sarah replied, checking to make sure the girl wasn't injured. "Need to find a safe way to get her to her family." The situation had become much more complicated. Sarah was pinned down behind minimal cover with a frightened child who spoke no English. Enemy fighters were closing in from multiple directions, and her squad's covering fire could only do so much from their distant position. Sarah looked at the little girl, who was crying silently with wide, terrified eyes. Despite the chaos around them, Sarah felt a moment of absolute clarity. This was why she had become a soldier, not for glory or recognition, but to protect innocent people who couldn't protect themselves. "It's okay," Sarah whispered to the child in the few words of the local language she had learned. "I'm going to get you out of here." She studied their surroundings, looking for escape routes. The wall they were hiding behind provided good protection from the front, but enemy fighters were moving to flank them. She needed to move soon, or they would be surrounded. Sarah spotted a drainage pipe that ran under the main road. It wasn't ideal cover, but it might provide a way to reach the other side of the village where the child's family had fled. With the little girl clinging to her neck, Sarah crawled toward the pipe opening. Enemy fire followed them, chipping stone from the buildings and kicking up dust around their position. Sarah shielded the child with her body as they moved. The drainage pipe was narrow and partially collapsed, but it provided concealment from enemy observation. Sarah crawled through the confined space with the child pressed against her chest, her rifle slung across her back. They emerged on the far side of the village, where a group of villagers had taken shelter behind a cluster of abandoned vehicles. Sarah recognized the child's mother immediately. She was crying and calling out her daughter's name. The reunion was emotional but brief. Enemy fighters were still active in the area, and Sarah needed to rejoin her squad before the tactical situation deteriorated further. As she prepared to move back toward Harrison's position, one of the villagers grabbed her arm. It was an elderly man who spoke broken English. You saved my granddaughter," he said, tears streaming down his face. "How we thank you." Sarah looked at the little girl, who was now safely in her mother's arms. Despite everything they had all been through, the child managed a small smile and wave. "Just keep her safe," Sarah replied. "That's all the thanks I need." The return journey to her squad was harrowing. Enemy fire had intensified, and Sarah had to use all her skills to avoid detection. She moved from cover to cover, using the terrain and abandoned buildings to mask her movement. When she finally reached Harrison's position, she found the squad engaged in a fierce firefight with the main enemy force. The tactical situation had changed dramatically while she was in the village. "Chun," Harrison called out. "Thank God you made it back. We've got enemy reinforcements moving in from the north. Air support is still 10 minutes out." Sarah quickly assessed the new threat. Enemy fighters were indeed approaching from the north, threatening to surround the squad's position. If they were caught in a crossfire, the entire patrol could be wiped out. "Sergeant, I can see their approach route from here," Sarah reported. "If I move to that ridgeline, I can slow them down with precision fire while you maintain pressure on the main force." Harrison nodded grimly. "Do it, but stay in radio contact." Sarah moved to her new position, a rocky outcropping that provided excellent fields of fire toward the approaching enemy reinforcements. From here, she could engage targets at extended range while remaining relatively protected from return fire. Through her scope, she could see the enemy force advancing in tactical formation. They were well-trained and disciplined, moving with purpose and coordination. But they had made one mistake. They were advancing through terrain that offered limited cover, making them vulnerable to accurate long-range fire. Sarah began engaging targets methodically, choosing her shots carefully to maximize effect. Each round was precisely aimed and delivered with the kind of marksmanship that had made her reputation during training. Enemy fighters began falling as her bullets found their marks. The advancing force slowed and then stopped as they realized they were under effective sniper fire. Sarah had bought her squad precious time, but she knew it wouldn't last long. The enemy would eventually find a way to neutralize her position or bypass it entirely. "Harrison, this is Chun," she reported. "I've halted their advance, but I can't hold them forever. What's the status on air support?" 5 minutes out, came the reply. "Keep them honest until the cavalry arrives." Sarah continued engaging targets, adjusting her aim for wind and distance with each shot. The enemy tried several times to advance, but her accurate fire forced them back into cover each time. Finally, the sound of approaching helicopters filled the air. Sarah could see the attack aircraft in the distance, racing toward their position with weapons ready. "All friendlies, mark your positions," the lead pilot announced over the radio. "We're coming in hot." Sarah used her mirror to signal her location to the aircraft, while Harrison's squad marked theirs with colored smoke. Within minutes, the helicopters were engaging the enemy positions with rockets and machine gun fire. The combined effect of air support and ground fire was devastating. The enemy force that had seemed so threatening just minutes before was scattered and retreating in chaos. As the helicopters circled to ensure the area was secure, Sarah made her way back to rejoin her squad. Harrison was grinning as she approached. "Outstanding work, Chun," he said, slapping her on the shoulder. "That was some of the finest shooting I've ever seen." Sarah felt a sense of satisfaction, but she was already thinking about the bigger picture. Today's action had been successful, but it was just one small engagement in a much larger conflict. There would be more battles, more innocent people in danger, more chances to prove herself. As the squad prepared to return to base, Sarah took one last look at the village where she had saved the little girl. The civilians were emerging from hiding, beginning the process of rebuilding their lives after another day of violence and terror. That evening, back at the forward base, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. General Stone had flown in to personally debrief the patrol and assess the tactical situation in their sector. Sergeant Harrison speaks very highly of your performance today, the general said as they met in the base commander's office. Says you showed exceptional courage and tactical thinking. Thank you, sir, Sarah replied. Just doing my job. General Stone studied her face carefully. 18 confirmed enemy kills, 1 civilian life saved, and successful coordination of air support. That's not just doing your job, soldier. That's exceptional performance under combat conditions. Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, finally, the general was beginning to recognize her capabilities. However, he continued, and Sarah's heart sank. Exceptional performance in one engagement doesn't automatically qualify someone for special operations. Combat effectiveness is about consistency over time, not individual heroic acts. Sarah wanted to argue, to point out everything she had accomplished, but she knew it would be futile. The general had made up his mind about her long ago, and no amount of evidence was going to change it quickly. I understand, sir, she said simply. But as General Stone prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Chun, I want you to know that what you did today, saving that child, that showed character. Not everyone would have risked their mission for a stranger. Every life matters, sir, especially innocent ones. The general nodded slowly. Yes, they do. Perhaps that's something we sometimes forget in our focus on military objectives. After he left, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, reflecting on the day's events. She had proven herself again, saved lives, and completed her mission successfully. But she still felt like she was fighting an uphill battle for recognition and respect. Outside her window, she could hear the sounds of the base settling down for the night. Guards walking their posts, radio chatter from the command center, the distant sound of helicopters returning from patrol. It was the soundtrack of military life, familiar and oddly comforting. Sarah cleaned her rifle and prepared her equipment for the next day's mission. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, and new chances to make a difference in the lives of innocent people caught up in the chaos of war. She was beginning to understand that earning respect in the military wasn't just about individual acts of courage or skill. It was about consistency, reliability, and the kind of character that people could depend on when everything was falling apart. Sarah Chun was determined to be that kind of soldier, no matter how long it took or how many obstacles stood in her way. The little girl's smile was all the motivation she needed. 6 months had passed since Sarah's heroic actions in the village, and the intelligence reports had become increasingly dire. A new terrorist leader known as the Shadow had emerged in the region, coordinating attacks with unprecedented sophistication and brutality. Unlike previous enemy commanders, the Shadow seemed to anticipate military responses and always stayed one step ahead of conventional tactics. Sarah sat in the briefing room at the main base, where General Stone was addressing a select group of special operations personnel. She wasn't officially part of the Special Ops unit, but her growing reputation for tactical innovation had earned her a seat at planning sessions. Ladies and gentlemen, General Stone began, his face grim. The Shadow has just executed the most devastating attack in this theater's history. 3 days ago, a convoy carrying medical supplies and civilian aid workers was ambushed. 15 people were killed, including 5 doctors from an international relief organization. Images flashed on the screen showing the aftermath of the attack. Burned vehicles, scattered supplies, and the kind of destruction that spoke of calculated violence rather than random terrorism. Intelligence suggests the Shadow is planning something much larger, the general continued. We've intercepted communications indicating a major operation targeting multiple civilian centers simultaneously. If successful, it could destabilize the entire region. Sarah studied the intelligence photos carefully. Something about the attack pattern seemed familiar, but she couldn't quite place what was bothering her. Sir, she said, raising her hand, do we have any information about the Shadow's background? Previous military training? Operational experience? General Stone looked at her with mild surprise. Some indication of formal military training, possibly with foreign special forces. Why do you ask? The attack on the convoy shows sophisticated planning and execution. This isn't just terrorism, it's military-level tactical thinking. The positioning of the ambush, the coordination of fire, the timing of the withdrawal, it suggests someone with extensive combat experience. Colonel Patricia Walsh, the base's intelligence chief, nodded in agreement. Chen's observation is correct. We're dealing with a professional, not just an ideologically motivated terrorist. General Stone considered this assessment. What does that tell us about potential countermeasures? Sarah stood up, moving to the map display. If the Shadow thinks like a military professional, then conventional responses might be exactly what they're expecting. We need to think outside standard operating procedures. Elaborate, the general said. Most military operations follow predictable patterns: reconnaissance, planning, approach, engagement, withdrawal. If the Shadow has formal training, they'll anticipate those patterns and plan accordingly. We need to do something unexpected. Captain Miller, the intelligence officer, joined the discussion. What kind of unexpected approach are you thinking about? Sarah traced potential routes on the map with her finger. The Shadow's communications suggest they're planning to hit multiple targets simultaneously. That requires significant coordination and precise timing. If we could disrupt their command and control at the right moment, we might be able to prevent the attacks entirely. General Stone frowned. Disrupting enemy communications is standard procedure. How is that unexpected? It's not about disrupting communications, sir. It's about hijacking them. If we could insert false orders into their network at the critical moment, we might be able to turn their own coordination against them. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. It was an audacious plan that would require incredible timing and execution. That would mean infiltrating their command structure, Colonel Walsh pointed out. Extremely dangerous and with no guarantee of success. But if it worked, Sarah continued, we could prevent civilian casualties while gathering intelligence on their entire network. It's worth considering. General Stone studied the map for several minutes before responding. The concept has merit, but it would require someone with exceptional skills in infiltration, communications, and tactical improvisation. Not to mention the ability to think on their feet when everything goes wrong. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was the kind of mission she had been preparing for her entire career. Sir, request permission to develop a detailed operational plan. Chun, this isn't a training exercise, the general replied firmly. This would be a solo infiltration mission against a highly sophisticated enemy. The risks are enormous. So are the stakes, sir. If the Shadow's attack succeeds, hundreds of innocent people could die. General Stone looked around the room, gauging the reactions of his senior officers. Colonel Walsh was nodding thoughtfully, while Captain Miller seemed intrigued by the technical challenges involved. Give me 24 hours to think about it, the general said finally. In the meantime, Chun, I want you to work with Miller to develop a preliminary plan. But understand, this is theoretical planning only. No commitments are being made. As the meeting broke up, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This could be the opportunity she had been waiting for, a chance to prove herself on a mission that truly mattered. Captain Miller approached her as they left the briefing room. Chun, what you're proposing, it's never been attempted before. The technical challenges alone are staggering. I know, Sarah replied. But sometimes the best solutions are the ones nobody expects. They spent the next 18 hours developing a detailed operational plan. The concept was complex but theoretically sound. Sarah would infiltrate the Shadow's network by posing as a new recruit, gain access to their communication system, and then insert false orders at the moment when their coordinated attack was supposed to begin. The plan required extensive preparation. Sarah would need to learn local dialects, understand the terrorist organization's internal structure, and master their communication protocols. Most importantly, she would need to be convincing enough to fool experienced fighters who would kill her instantly if they suspected deception. The biggest challenge, Miller explained as they reviewed intelligence reports, is that we know very little about the Shadow personally. Gender, age, physical appearance, it's all speculation based on intercepted communications. Sarah studied the available information carefully. What about operational patterns? Leadership style? Decision-making processes? The Shadow appears to be highly intelligent and extremely cautious. Never uses the same communication method twice. Never stays in one location for more than a few hours, and maintains strict operational security. That's actually helpful, Sarah said thoughtfully. It suggests someone who relies more on intellect than brute force. If I can demonstrate tactical knowledge and value, I might be able to gain access to their inner circle. The next morning, General Stone called Sarah to his office. She found him standing at the window, looking out at the training grounds where soldiers were conducting exercises. I've reviewed your plan, he said without turning around. It's both brilliant and completely insane. Yes, sir. If it succeeds, it could save hundreds of lives and provide intelligence that transforms our understanding of the enemy network. Yes, sir. If it fails, you'll be captured, tortured, and executed. And we'll have gained nothing except the loss of a valuable soldier. Sarah waited for him to continue. I've spent my entire career trying to protect soldiers from unnecessary risks, General Stone said, finally turning to face her. Everything in my training and experience tells me to reject this plan. But, Sarah prompted, but I've also learned that sometimes conventional wisdom isn't enough. Sometimes you need someone willing to take extraordinary risks to achieve extraordinary results. Sarah felt her heart racing as she realized what he was saying. The mission is approved, General Stone said quietly. God help us both. The next 2 weeks were a blur of intensive preparation. Sarah learned 3 local dialects, memorized the organizational structure of the Shadows network, and practiced with communication equipment she had never used before. She also underwent psychological preparation for the possibility of capture and torture. Colonel Walsh oversaw her training personally. Remember, Chun, once you're in the field, you're completely on your own. We can't provide backup or extraction if things go wrong. Your only safety net is your own skills and judgment. Sarah nodded. She had understood the risks from the beginning. There's something else, Walsh continued. We've received new intelligence suggesting the Shadows' planned attack is even more ambitious than we initially believed. They're not just targeting civilian centers. They're planning to hit military installations simultaneously, creating maximum chaos and casualties. How much time do we have? Based on intercepted communications, the attack is scheduled for 72 hours from now. You need to infiltrate their network, identify their command structure, and disrupt their operations before then. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Hundreds of lives would depend on her ability to succeed in an impossible mission. The infiltration began at dawn. Sarah, now dressed as a local civilian and carrying identification documents forged by military intelligence, made her way to the mountain village where the Shadows network was believed to operate. The village appeared normal on the surface, farmers tending their fields, children playing in the streets, merchants selling goods in the small marketplace. But Sarah knew that somewhere among these innocent-looking people were terrorists planning mass murder. Her cover story was simple but believable. She was a refugee from a distant province whose family had been killed in a government raid. She sought revenge and was willing to fight for anyone who opposed the authorities. Sarah spent the first day establishing her presence in the village, buying supplies, and asking careful questions about local conditions. She noticed several men who seemed to be watching her, evaluating whether she posed a threat. On the second day, she was approached by a woman who introduced herself as Fatima. Fatima was middle-aged, with intelligent eyes, and a demeanor that suggested authority despite her humble appearance. "I understand you're new to our village," Fatima said in the local dialect. "These are dangerous times for strangers." "I have nowhere else to go," Sarah replied, using the accent and speech pattern she had practiced. "My family is dead. I want only to survive." Fatima studied her carefully. Survival requires more than hope. It requires commitment to the right cause. Sarah recognized this as a recruitment approach. What kind of commitment? The kind that demands everything from you, but offers the chance to strike back at those who have taken everything from us. Over the next several hours, Sarah underwent a gradual recruitment process. Fatima introduced her to other members of the network, each one evaluating her story and her potential value to their organization. The breakthrough came when Sarah demonstrated her knowledge of military tactics during a discussion about government security measures. Her insights impressed the recruiters and established her credibility as someone with useful skills. "The Shadow will want to meet you personally," Fatima said finally. Few people gain that honor so quickly. Sarah felt a surge of excitement mixed with terror. Meeting the Shadow would put her at the heart of the terrorist network, but it would also expose her to the greatest danger. That evening, she was blindfolded and driven to a location in the mountains. When the blindfold was removed, she found herself in a cave complex that had been converted into a sophisticated command center. And there, studying intelligence reports at a metal table, was the Shadow. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized the truth. The shadow was a woman. Not just any woman, but someone Sarah recognized from military intelligence files. Major Elena Volkov, a former Special Forces officer who had disappeared during a classified operation 3 years earlier. Volkov had been presumed dead, but clearly she had survived and used her military training to build a terrorist network of unprecedented sophistication. Her knowledge of military procedures and tactics made her far more dangerous than any conventional terrorist leader. "So you're the refugee with tactical knowledge," Volkov said in perfect English, looking up from her maps. "Tell me, what makes you think you can contribute to our cause?" Sarah's mind raced. Her original plan had assumed the Shadow would be a local insurgent leader. Facing a trained military professional changed everything. "I know how government forces think," Sarah replied carefully, maintaining her cover identity. "I can anticipate their responses and help plan operations that avoid their strengths." Volkov smiled coldly. "Can you? Tell me, what would be your assessment of the security around the medical facility in the Eastern District?" It was a test, and Sarah knew her answer would determine whether she lived or died. She drew on her genuine military knowledge to provide a detailed tactical analysis, being careful to frame it from the perspective of someone seeking to attack the facility rather than defend it. "Impressive," Volkov said when Sarah finished. "You clearly have some training. The question is, whose training?" Sarah felt sweat running down her back despite the cool air in the cave. Volkov was suspicious, probing for inconsistencies in her story. "I learned from watching, from surviving," Sarah said. "When soldiers kill your family, you learn to understand how they think." Volkov stood up and walked around Sarah slowly, studying her from all angles. "Yes, I suppose you do. Very well. You'll participate in tomorrow's operation. Consider it a final examination." As Sarah was led to a sleeping area with other recruits, she realized that the Shadow's attack was scheduled for the next day, 24 hours ahead of their intelligence estimate. She needed to find a way to contact her base and warn them, but the cave complex was heavily guarded and communications were strictly controlled. That night, as the other recruits slept, Sarah carefully explored the command center. She memorized the layout of the facility, identified key personnel, and located the communications equipment. The scope of Volkov's planned attack was staggering. She had coordinated with terrorist cells across the entire region to launch simultaneous strikes against military bases, civilian centers, and infrastructure targets. If successful, it would create chaos and casualties on an unprecedented scale. Sarah knew she had to act. Even if it meant exposing herself, she couldn't allow this attack to succeed. Too many innocent lives hung in the balance. As dawn approached, she put her desperate plan into motion. Using skills learned during her military training, she quietly disabled the guards and gained access to the communication center. Working quickly, Sarah transmitted a coded warning to her base, providing details about the planned attacks and their timing. Then, she began the most dangerous part of her mission, inserting false orders into the Shadow's communication network. Using Volkov's own communication protocols, Sarah sent messages to the various terrorist cells, changing timing, targets, and coordination details. If her deception worked, the carefully planned simultaneous attack would become a confused series of uncoordinated strikes that military forces could defeat. But as she finished transmitting the false orders, Sarah heard footsteps approaching the communication center. Volkov had discovered her infiltration, and now Sarah faced the most dangerous moment of her life. The confrontation that followed would determine not just Sarah's fate, but the lives of hundreds of innocent people whose safety depended on the success of her mission. The footsteps stopped just outside the communication center. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she frantically tried to finish uploading the false orders into the Shadow's network. She had maybe 30 seconds before whoever was approaching would discover her. Step away from the equipment came a cold voice behind her. Sarah froze. She recognized the voice immediately. Major Elena Volkov, the Shadow herself. Sarah's infiltration had been discovered at the worst possible moment. "Turn around slowly," Volkov commanded. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Sarah complied, her mind racing through possible escape scenarios. Volkov stood in the doorway, pointing a pistol directly at her chest. Behind her, Sarah could see armed guards taking positions to block any escape routes. "Captain Sarah Chun, United States Army," Volkov said with a knowing smile. "Did you really think I wouldn't recognize you?" Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. Her cover had been blown completely. I knew who you were the moment you walked into this village, Volkov continued. Your photograph has been circulating in intelligence networks for months. The female soldier who's been causing so much trouble for enemy operations. Then, why did you let me get this far? Sarah asked, trying to buy time while she looked for any possible advantage. Because I wanted to see what you were planning. I wanted to understand how American military intelligence operates, what they knew about my network. Volkov gestured toward the communications equipment. And now I know exactly how much damage you try to do. Sarah realized that her desperate gambit might have failed. If Volkov had been monitoring her activities, she might have been able to intercept or counter the false orders before they reached the terrorist cells. It doesn't matter, Sarah said defiantly. Your attack is compromised. Military forces are already responding to defend your targets. Volkov laughed, but there was no humor in it. My dear Captain Shun, you've made one critical error in your calculations. You assumed that my real plan was the one you discovered. Sarah felt a chill of realization. What do you mean? The communications you intercepted, the attack plans you found, they were all deliberately placed for you to discover. The real operation is something entirely different. Volkov moved to the communications console and began entering commands. While you've been busy disrupting attacks on military targets and infrastructure, my real objective has been proceeding exactly as planned. Images appeared on the screen, showing a convoy of vehicles moving through mountain roads. Sarah recognized the route. It led directly to a refugee camp that housed thousands of displaced civilians, including hundreds of children. The refugee camp, Sarah whispered in horror. You're targeting defenseless civilians. Not targeting, Volkov corrected. Already in position. My people have been infiltrating that camp for weeks. Right now, they have explosives positioned throughout the facility. One signal from me, and 5,000 innocent people die. Sarah felt sick. While she had been focused on preventing attacks against military and government targets, Volkov had been planning something far more devastating, a mass murder of refugees who had no ability to defend themselves. The beauty of the plan, Volkov continued, is that even if your people received your warning, they're defending the wrong targets. By the time they realize their mistake, it will be too late. Sarah looked at the countdown timer on the communications console. 18 minutes until the planned detonation. Even if she could somehow contact her base, there wasn't enough time to mount a rescue operation. Why? Sarah asked. These are innocent people. Children, families, elderly civilians who have nothing to do with this conflict. Volkov's expression hardened. Because terror isn't just about military victories. It's about breaking the enemy's will to fight. When people realize that no one is safe, not soldiers, not politicians, not even refugees hiding in camps, they'll demand an end to this war on any terms. That's not strategy, Sarah said angrily. That's mass murder. Sometimes they're the same thing, Volkov replied coldly. I learned that from the best American military doctrine. Shock and awe, overwhelming force, acceptable casualties for strategic objectives. Sarah realized that Volkov's betrayal of her own military training ran deeper than simple terrorism. This was personal revenge against the system that had created and then abandoned her. What happened to you? Sarah asked. You were a decorated officer. What turned you into this? Volkov paused, and for a moment Sarah saw a flicker of the soldier she had once been. 3 years ago, I led a classified operation that went wrong. My entire team was captured and tortured because of faulty intelligence. I was the only survivor. So you blamed the military for intelligence failures? I blamed the military for leaving us to die, Volkov said bitterly. When I escaped, I tried to make contact. I waited for rescue, for extraction, for any sign that my country cared about getting me home. Sarah began to understand the depth of Volkov's betrayal and anger. No one came, Volkov continued. I was listed as killed in action and forgotten. My sacrifice, my team's sacrifice, it all meant nothing. So I decided to show them the consequences of abandoning their own people. Killing innocent refugees won't bring your team back, Sarah said. And it won't change what happened to you. No, Volkov agreed, but it will send a message that can't be ignored. It will show the world the true cost of American military intervention. The countdown timer showed 14 minutes remaining. Sarah knew she was running out of time and options, but she also knew that she couldn't give up. Too many lives depended on finding a way to stop the attack. There's something you don't understand about me, Sarah said quietly. Oh, and what's that? I didn't earn my reputation by following standard procedures. I earned it by doing whatever it takes to protect innocent people. Before Volkov could react, Sarah dove sideways, using the communications console for cover as she drew her concealed sidearm. Bullets cracked overhead as the guards opened fire, but Sarah had anticipated their positions and movements. She fired twice in rapid succession, taking down 2 guards before rolling behind additional cover. Volkov shouted orders in the local dialect, calling for reinforcements while trying to maintain control of the situation. "You can't stop this, Chun," Volkov called out. "Even if you kill me, the attack will proceed automatically. The timer is already running." Sarah knew Volkov was probably right, but she couldn't stop fighting. She moved from cover to cover, using her superior knowledge of close-quarters combat to outmaneuver the guards. Her military training had prepared her for exactly this kind of desperate situation. "Then, I'll have to stop it myself," Sarah replied, working her way toward the communications console. The firefight continued for several minutes, with Sarah gradually eliminating Volkov's guards through precise shooting and tactical movement. But time was running out. The countdown showed 8 minutes until detonation. Finally, Sarah managed to reach the communications console. Volkov was still alive, but wounded, her pistol empty, and no immediate threats remaining. "It's too late," Volkov said weakly. "The system requires 2-factor authentication to abort. You need both the command codes and biometric verification." Sarah studied the console desperately. The interface was in multiple languages, with security protocols she had never seen before. Even with Volkov's cooperation, she might not be able to stop the countdown in time. "Give me the codes," Sarah demanded, pointing her weapon at Volkov. "Even if I wanted to help you," Volkov replied, "the system won't accept commands from my current location. It's designed to prevent exactly this scenario, someone forcing me to abort under duress." Sarah felt desperation creeping in. 6 minutes until detonation, and she was no closer to stopping the attack than before. But then she remembered something from her intelligence briefing. The refugee camp had its own communication system for coordinating aid deliveries and security. If she could contact them directly, she might be able to warn them to begin evacuations. "The camp's emergency frequency," Sarah said, more to herself than to Volkov. "If I can reach their security team." She began frantically adjusting the radio equipment, searching for the frequency used by the refugee camp's security personnel. It was a desperate gambit. Even if she could establish contact, there might not be enough time to evacuate 5,000 people. The radio crackled to life, and Sarah heard voices speaking in accented English. Security personnel at the refugee camp, conducting routine communications. "Mayday, Mayday," Sarah transmitted urgently. "This is Captain Shun, United States Army. You have explosive devices planted throughout your facility. Begin immediate evacuation procedures." The response was confused and skeptical. "Unknown station, please identify yourself and state the nature of your emergency." "Listen to me carefully," Sarah said, speaking as clearly and authoritatively as possible. "I'm a United States Army officer conducting a special operation. Your camp is the target of a terrorist attack scheduled to begin in 4 minutes. You must evacuate all personnel immediately. Ma'am, we have no information about any military operations in this area." Sarah looked at the countdown timer. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. "Check with your military liaison," she said desperately. "Contact any official you trust. But start moving people now. You have less than 4 minutes. Through the radio, she could hear increased activity at the camp.